This is Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast hosted by Cody Schultz and Ben Horn. This week, our conversation turns primarily toward that of constructive criticism, a topic brought up due to my experiences so far with student teaching and the desire I have to improve in the field. We discuss our openness to criticism and how that openness changes as we begin to gain confidence in our craft. Though that confidence can sometimes be misguided as we ponder our intentions and the idea of why we choose to photograph what we choose to photograph. As we end the conversation, we provide an update regarding screen time, which we had spoken about in episode 36, as well as speaking a bit on humanity, sparked by a book I am currently reading. Let's dive right in, shall we? If I could wake up, maybe. Oh, it's been a long day.
Yeah, I imagine. I've got my my cup of tea going here to get a little caffeine in me, but I would imagine that you've been through a lot more lately in terms of the early mornings and everything associated with the student teaching and such.
Yeah. It also doesn't help that right now the sun's starting to set, so it's starting to get darker as I'm trying to and every day during the week I get home and it's dark already, because after student teaching I either go to I'll go to the gym Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or on Tuesdays I have what they call practicum, which is essentially an hour-long class where you just talk about different aspects of what you're learning through the teaching and that kind of deal. And that's a weekly thing. And then Thursdays, obviously most days I have the recording with the podcast or whatever.
Yeah.
So days have been long, but it's been enjoyable. I can't say otherwise. I'm enjoying it a lot more than I thought that I would, which is good.
Yeah, that's good. Getting a good real world taste of the full experience.
Yeah. I mean, today, and there are other days too that are very trying days when it comes to certain classes. There's my 5th period class is very chaotic, and so it can be very difficult to get them on task and to just shut up for a little while. So
yes,
today they were giving me some difficulty, and my mentor teacher stepped in to kind of deal with classroom management because I was starting to struggle a little bit with it, which I mean, it's to be expected. I've only been kind of starting to really have my voice heard more and start to take over more responsibility recently. A lot of what we're doing right now is co-teaching and everything, so it makes sense that my classroom management skills aren't top-notch kind of deal, but
yeah, that's gonna be something that develops over quite a bit of time, I would imagine. I don't think that's something people walk into that sort of job just already having that skill set.
And I mean, he's been teaching for something like 15 years now, I think, and even he struggles sometimes too. There's as part of him being my mentor teacher, he has to go through and essentially grade me, so to speak. Not with a letter grade, but are you meeting the requirements of being a professional teacher kind of deal? And we are going over that this past Tuesday. And he was saying okay, yeah, you're good with this. You could use a little bit more work with this, yada, yada, yada. But then there are also moments where he's yeah, this is something that you and I both could really work on. And even after him having been teaching for 15 years classroom management, I mean, it's always changing because the kids are always changing. So you always have to adapt to the environment around you, plus each period is different. So it all comes with time. So I'm not that worried about it, but it's one of those things of it's very trying because it frustrates the hell out of you when they just won't listen. And when they're just testing you like that, I'm
yeah,
all right, just breathe and get through it. But
sounds like it's like having a classroom filled with cats. Because that's my own measure for that. Yeah, I can imagine how that would be difficult. So when it comes to, in general, when it comes to like constructive criticism, how do you fare with constructive criticism? Like if they're telling you, like, you know, these are things to improve on, do you soak that up? Do you imbue that? Or do you like what's your response to that?
Oh, I want as much of constructive criticism as I can get. Absolutely.
That's good.
I want to hear from him as much as possible with this because I want to succeed with it. I want to make it into something that I really do enjoy doing, but that I also can be very well off with doing. One of the issues that I'm facing right now, and I'm hoping it's not an issue come the next few weeks and for the rest of this time, my supervisor. So a college professor, part of this program, has to come in and observe at least 6 lessons that you administer, that you teach over the course of these.
Do you get to choose which ones they come in for, or is it just kind of surprise?
It's not
kind of a thing.
It's not surprise, but it's not like they have to do it within a certain time frame. So like we're about 3 weeks in. He should have already come in by now. But his schedule is very hectic, which is making it very difficult for him to find time to come in, which I have issues with, but I'm not going to get into that right now because, that's just a very irritating situation nonetheless. So that's one of the big things is like, I really want him to come in. I wanted him to come in today and observe this lesson that I was co-teaching with my mentor. Because we had planned it out specifically with him in mind, with him coming in mind. So when on Tuesday he was like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to, I'm kind of like you got to work with me here, you know?
Yeah.
Like I'm supposed to be following this school's schedule and this school's curriculum and all of that. But then he's trying to make it it's a whole mess. It's just irritating because like I want that feedback. I want to have that kind of that constructive criticism in order to improve. I don't just want to go by what my mentor teacher is telling me, like, because it's just one person. So, but so
now,
it goes.
I can see how since you're very new to this, I'm definitely of the mindset as well that the constructive criticism is extremely important because it gives you that sense of direction. But what about when it pertains to something that you're very knowledgeable about, like your photography? Are you also as receptive to the constructive criticism the same way when you kind of already have a feeling for like an independent project you're working on, or would you see that as being not as wanted?
I think there's a big difference there. There's a big difference between getting constructive feedback on a skill versus an art or an art form. So like when it comes, obviously I'm very receptive to criticism, to feedback when it comes to like, oh, if you do this way, you may come out with this result. Like if you try this technique, you can probably get to this end result faster. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to criticizing, I don't know, oh, this photograph is too dark for XYZ reason or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a personal choice that I made, and art is already so subjective. So that I kind of stay away from. That's also why like I love Nature Photographers Network. I love everything that gets done over there, and I enjoy giving some kind of like constructive criticism here and there when I have the time to. But I also don't put my work on the site a lot for that because like I said, it's so subjective. I like the work that I put out is pretty much how I want it at that moment in time.
Yeah.
Which could be good in terms of sticking to your guns like that. But on the other hand, it could be really bad because that may be preventing you from growing. So I'm kind of like a little bit in the middle ground there when it comes to that kind of thing. How about you?
Yeah. I'm from the standpoint that when it comes to my own, like basically the photos that I shoot, they're completely for me.
Yeah.
And so I'm honestly not looking to please anyone with the work. It's something that satisfies something within me. And I can see how it'd be one thing if a person's growth was completely stagnated and they're not seeing any long-term growth at all. And if they were unsatisfied with the work that they were creating. But I think once you get to the point where you are satisfied with the work that you're creating and you still see that growth where you can look back at your work from, 5-6 years ago and be, oh, my stuff is better now than it was then. I'm very much more wanting to just stay on that natural learning curve. And because I know that there's some people who will like send their work to fellow photographers before releasing it, because they really, they really want to have that criticism in order to like make it as good as possible. I have never felt the desire to do that. For me, it's just if I'm going to release something, it's on my own terms, on my own timeline, and also I should mention that the images on my website, I'm continually kind of tweaking them a little bit. Like I might scroll through some of them and then see a particular photo. I'm like, there's something about this one I don't like quite as much anymore. So I'll tweak it and then I'll just update it kind of silently, where everything kind of gets updated that way over time. But I've never had I've never felt the need to sort of have other people view the work before I put it out there. I just don't know that I would gain much from that.
See, with my writing, I'll do that, or would like to, especially with something that's I may not be as knowledgeable about. I would be more likely to send it off to someone, not all the time, and I haven't necessarily done it as well or as often in the past with certain essays that I've written as I should have. And I realize that more and more. I like to get feedback on it. Like a lot of the times I'll send it to just my girlfriend or to someone outside of our field. Someone who, like, what they would consider a lay person, where they don't necessarily understand the terminology. They may not have the background information about the subjects I'm writing on. Because if they can understand it, then I'm good. Then I know that I've covered pretty much all of my bases in that. Then I can reach as many people as possible and can bring them into maybe some of my deeper written work. So when it comes to writing, I am more than welcome or more than open to constructive criticism for a lot of things. Because I know that I can improve a lot and I'm actively looking for that. It's more of a skill as I see it than it is an art form.
Yeah.
And I think that's really where that distinction is drawn. But like you had said about once you get to a certain point where you really know exactly what you want out of your photography, out of your writing, out of whatever, there's a point where you start to really realize what you need from it and what you want to convey and how to convey it. And after that point, after you cross that line, constructive criticism is just kind of take it or leave it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of my view on that as well. I don't know. I think it's just like I don't know, maybe in some ways like playing an instrument or something like that. Once you were able to just do things, play it in a way that is effortless, that you achieve you achieve what you want to, and just as I was saying earlier, as that growth continues, I think that's a good thing. And I also wonder if there's something to be said about sort of the introvert versus extrovert mentality there too, in terms of perhaps introverts not really, like, they're just kind of know what they want. They're not really concerned necessarily about what the greater perception of it is. Extroverts perhaps seeking more feedback from the community and stuff. And I mean, I don't know if there's some aspect to that as well.
That'd be interesting to look up. I might have to do that after we get finished recording this here. Look into that. The difference between introversion and extroversion, and if there is a true connection to one preferring constructive criticism versus the other. Because I mean, I get what you're saying, that there could be kind of introverts kind of want to say more to themselves and may not be as open to that kind of criticism for one reason or another, versus extroverts constantly wanting to be around people, stereotypically at least, and wanting to get to that kind of feedback.
Yeah, they perhaps value that feedback, and as part of the hive mind. I don't know. But in other news, I recently returned from Death Valley. I spent 6 days there, and it was a good trip. I had a little bit of the first day funk on the first day, but I mostly got over that, by the time it was the second full day there.
Okay.
And it was interesting. I had some, every time I go to a place that I revisit for photography, there will at times be subjects that I photographed at one point, but it just didn't work out very well. Maybe the lighting wasn't great, or something else there was something about it that just didn't really work. And so I create a list of some of these areas to potentially revisit and try to rephotograph. And there's this one scene, which was the final subject that I photographed on last year's trip. It was kind of a scene at the base of a mountain where there was some kind of a rocky wash with some slopes going in different angles and stuff. And I photographed it in the morning when it was in indirect light. And it was just, the light wasn't all that great. It was kind of flat. And so I figured if I shoot that just after sunset and so basically the slope I was photographing faces west. And so I figured if I photograph it after sunset, then you have a bit more dynamic light, because you have the orange gradient low on the horizon, the blue sky above that, and you get this, it's kind of nice dimensional sort of light and at twilight. So I figured I'd go back and I'd photograph that. And so on my first full day, or actually my first day there, not full day, but my first day there, I revisited that location. I looked at it. I'm like, yeah, this would definitely look better at sunset. Yet I have zero desire whatsoever to photograph it again. And even though it was just sitting there for the taking, I'm like, the conditions are great. It's not particularly windy. There's no clouds, so I'm going to have like that nice gradient on the horizon. But I just looked at it. I'm like, I've already done this. I didn't do it well, but I've already done this, and I have no desire to photograph it. And so I kind of wandered around a bit, and I found, I don't know, maybe 200 feet away, there was this large boulder that had kind of tumbled down the slope a little bit. It was set up against kind of a nice looking background. And the boulder is kind of like this white and reddish sort of color. And the surrounding landscape was kind of more of a brownish. And there was this trail of like a little bits of rock that he had eroded from this boulder, almost like the trail of a comet that kind of like went down in the foreground. And I looked at that. I'm like, well, this is something I want to photograph. And so I set up a composition of that, and I have no clue how it turned out. It could be that it's not great. Maybe it's okay. I don't know. But I had no desire to photograph something I had done before, but then there was something new, and I felt a strong connection to it. And I was trying to figure out, what is it that's at play here? And I finally kind of came to the conclusion that with large format in particular, since there's so much effort that goes into setting up and then waiting for the subject, that's a barrier that I will cross if it's a subject I feel like I have a very strong connection to. But then if I return to that subject, I don't have that connection anymore because I'm kind of having a different mindset perhaps at the time. And so it was just interesting how I was able to find a subject not far from the one I thought I was going to shoot, yet I had no desire to shoot the one I went there to shoot. And so I know that we've spoken in the past about, rephotographing scenes and areas that are close to home. You have the ability to give it another try and reshoot it again. So that got me thinking a little bit about how your thoughts are when it comes to standing in your same footsteps and photographing the same scene you've already photographed, and whether you still feel that degree of connection as you did the first time, or whether you just feel like you're like, what am I doing here, kind of a thing.
I think it depends on the subject and how strong of a connection I felt to that composition, to that subject, to whatever. I have one photograph that I've been trying to get on film. I have it on digital, but there's just like we've talked about before, that little disconnect where digital just doesn't feel right. So I want to re-photograph it on film, but a few weeks back we had talked about how I had gone to this local park and the focusing bed was drifting because of tilting the camera up. That was when I was photographing this. It's a real simple scene. It's a telephone pole in a field. And how I have it on digital is there are nice white puffy clouds in the background. The sky is pretty dark. Simplistic, just nature themed, but having a human element, which is something that I've been experimenting more with recently. But nonetheless, I've tried photographing it then, and not only did the focusing bed cause issues with it, I also messed up with my development for somehow, because that just happens randomly sometimes. And then I went back to that same area maybe 2 weeks ago, something like that, and I wanted to re-photograph it again to try and get it, but the clouds weren't right, and I took the trail the opposite way that I had the 2 previous times that I'd been to this park. Ended up finding, I think, 1 or 2 other compositions that no idea whether they turned out right or not. But to get back to the main point, I still want to keep going back to this park and photographing this telephone pole until I get it right, because something about it just keeps calling back to me. But then there are times where I'll photograph a scene and okay, it might not turn out right. For that same day that I had messed up with the telephone pole, there's also a little barn that has just a random thick wire or some kind of metal piece coming out of the top of it. And I had framed up a composition there and photographed that. And again, that was one that didn't turn out right because of development and the focusing issues. But I have no desire to go back and photograph that one. Like I didn't even try the last time that I was there. So for me, it really comes down to the pure connection and how strong of a connection to that subject that I have, regardless whether it makes sense to me, like on a conscious standpoint. But yeah, so I'll gladly go back and keep going back, because you never know what you're going to find. Like the next time that I go back, for all I know, this telephone pole could have a couple more wires hanging down than what it already does. Or the wires that are hanging down could be fixed, and it could completely change it. And then at that point, I could just say, it's not what I want. Like it turns out that those wires and the dishevelment of it, the fact that nature was kind of starting to take it back, and then humanity brought it back to life. Yeah, maybe that's not the story that I wanted to tell. So
yeah, you show up there and there's this brand new pole there, and all shiny, clean. That's it definitely would not be quite the same there. And also one of the things that we've spoken about in the past is the contemplative approach, where I'll find a subject, I'll sit there and I'll wait 3-4 hours or whatever for the light to be good, take the photo, and then go away from it and move on to whatever else. But I was thinking about how the fact that I spend that much time with a subject and kind of have all the memories of standing there and just waiting for the light. Maybe I'm listening to some podcasts or something while I'm out there. But by the time I return to that location a second time, it just kind of feels like I've already done this. I already have, every possible connection I could have to the subject is already, I can't do anything more than that. I already have the memories of standing here. And so yeah, it's kind of an odd feeling. There are certain subjects where I definitely, where it's such a strong subject that I beat myself up over, that I messed it up for one reason or another. Those ones I think I'm more inclined to go back and shoot. But I think by and large, I think setting up my own tripod in my own tripod holes from a year earlier, it feels a little bit a little dissatisfying. But
at the same time,
but beyond that,
I always love those series and a couple different photographers. I'll see if I can find the link to the one that I'm thinking of right now. But
like the same scene through the same different seasons or something like that?
Yeah. I absolutely
those are fascinating.
Love those. So I think in that, because it is a story that you are telling, it's clearly a scene that means something to the photographer. Like that, that I think is just fascinating to see, but it's also so difficult to do. Like to get that composition just right, to get everything lined back up. Like, especially if
you almost have to start with like the winter scene or something like that, like the most challenging one, and then like, all right, let's try it in fall, let's try it in spring and summer.
Yeah, I don't understand how you're going to go from winter to fall, but I'm sure you'll work that out. But
yes,
but I mean that's one of the nice things, like for me, for having the property up north and really photographing that a lot. I can kind of revisit those scenes and continue to rephotograph them in that manner if I wanted to. But even then, it's very difficult to do, because it's not like it's easy to figure out where your tripod holes were. And even if you like put bright shiny rocks where you had your tripod set up, it doesn't mean that they won't get kicked around or something won't happen to them.
Yeah.
So I definitely, those are definitely great to witness.
Yeah. And some other stuff on the Death Valley trip. I did the written journal entries like I did on the trip to Zion, and I was able to write more this time, now that I know that the format can accept more than a single page of writing.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask if you wrote more or not.
Yeah, so usually at minimum it's 2 pages, some cases 3 to 4 pages. And my goal, based on what I'd learned from the time I did this in the fall, is that I wanted to remain as in the moment and as in the present tense as possible. So Because when I first did it, it was kind of more so just talking about the experience of the day, more so at the end of the day. But in this case, I was hiking around with a journal with me, and I'd just find myself, I went to a lot of canyons on this trip, a lot of canyons that I don't even see any names for. I just see them on the satellite maps and find ways of getting to them. So I'll be in these canyons all to myself, no human footprints other than my own. And I was just like, sit down against the canyon wall and just kind of describe what's around me. And I think this was very beneficial for my approach because it really made me so much more aware of everything around me. Just trying to think of how to describe the sights and the sounds. And then I started noticing other things. Like I started, in the morning, there were some birds singing. It was a little bit at the distance at first, but then I heard it again a little bit closer. I'm like, oh, that's a mockingbird. It's like, I definitely recognize that call. And then I heard the call of a wren of some sort. I don't know that it's a canyon wren. I don't think they live there, but I think it's a close relative. And the canyon wren is one of my favorite birds just because of the call that it makes. But I heard that call in the background and I'm like, oh, wow. I start noticing all these little things. And I think some of that really helped me to be more aware of my surroundings and to notice some of the more visual details that I may not have noticed in the past. And also just stopping and taking time just to relax and just to take it all in. And the other thing too, and this is something that has come up a lot in my past videos from Death Valley, is I always find Mylar balloons out there.
Yeah.
And so I found just 3 on this trip. Usually I find more than that. But on one of them, I'm hiking through one of these canyons. And then, I was recording a video. I didn't even know the balloon was there, but I kind of about to go around the corner of this canyon. And then there's a Mylar balloon. So I kind of reach down, pick it up, throw it in my pocket and keep going. And then as it turns out, about 10 feet away from that was this interesting subject that I decided to photograph. So it's like I find a balloon, there's a cool subject. And then a little bit later on the trip, same thing. I found a cool subject and there's a balloon right next to it. So I don't know. I think there's something to that landscape karma of, you pick up some of that trash, it leaves you feeling a little bit better. You kind of more aware of your surroundings. And so hopefully that led to some decent photos. We'll see when I get my film back.
So are you continuing on with that project that you've been working on the past couple of years now?
For the balloon one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still collecting all the balloons. I still have to figure out, I might have enough to do it now. Whether it's just probably a printed zine or something like that. Okay. But yeah, I think I probably have enough balloons for it. It could be a project that I pursue during like the summer months when things are a little bit quiet in terms of photographing them and then making a zine. I think it's just a fascinating story of, here these balloons are in the landscape that, were around happy occasions and now they're just abandoned trash out in the middle of nowhere wreaking havoc with wildlife. So yeah, I think it's something I definitely will work on during some of the quieter months ahead.
Yeah, the balloons always remind me. There's a photograph from Chuck Kimmerly he has a photograph titled Happy Trash. And it was while he was living in New York. It's on Staten Island. And it's just one of those like yellow smiley balloons. Mm-hmm. Just in a wide landscape of, I don't know, it looks just like kind of like a beach kind of thing. Great big sky and everything. The balloon is somewhat like tiny. It's minuscule in the landscape, but it immediately draws your eye. And I always just, like I was saying earlier, I've become so much more fascinated with the human element in nature photographs or in nature in general. And kind of finding that juxtaposition. I mean, I remember when I first started off with landscape photography, I was so against even photographing like churches Like, I'm not religious to any degree, but I've always loved certain churches and the architectural aspect of them.
Mm-hmm.
But anytime that I'd ever like look at one and be like, oh, that'd make a cool photograph, I'd tell myself, no human element, nothing. Like,
Yeah.
I want it as natural as possible. And so it's been fun to see that that transition into a lot of the work that I do now that has at least traces of human elements in it. I mean, I'm rebuilding my website and continuing on that very slow process, but one of the galleries that I have is just called the human element, because I have at least 6, if not 10 photographs that all have traces of humanity in nature and the juxtaposition between them. So it's going to be fascinating to see how my work progresses in that manner.
Yeah, those are oftentimes some of the more powerful images. I think especially for black and white, where there's already kind of a storytelling sort of feel to it just based on the format. But there's so much story from whether it's something that is, decaying in nature, whether it's something that's, new built in the middle of something that was, otherwise pristine. So I think there's a strong aspect of story to that, which is certainly a very powerful concept when it comes to photography.
Yeah, it definitely is. One of the other things that, actually, let's go back a couple of weeks. So a couple of weeks ago, we had talked about screen time, and I had promised an update on that.
Okay, I'm curious.
I do believe it's time for that. It's kind of a little unfair because, I'm student teaching now, so I'm like off my phone pretty much all day. So the comparison isn't as the sound as it should be, but
yeah,
nonetheless. So about this time last month, my weekly average for screen time was roughly 6 hours or so. I've knocked that down just about in half at this point.
Nice.
Still not like fantastic, but for someone who grew up in the technology age, that's kind of, expected, I guess, in a way.
So that's the 6 hours spread over the full 7 days, right?
Yeah, that's the average. So it was roughly 6 hours a day.
Oh, 6 hours a day. Gotcha.
Right. So that's the average of the whole week. Let me pull it up again and I can actually run through and see what the actual days were.
I have my phone up right now, and so far for this week, I'm at 2 hours, 16 minutes a day.
Yeah, so there were some days where, like if I go back to that Wednesday, January 25th, was about 9 hours on my phone, which is insane. But then if I go to like today, an hour and a half.
Yeah, I'm actually for today. Yeah. I'm at hour and 32 minutes, but also I'm 3 hours ahead of you. So I will, by the time I get to your time, I will have unfortunately surpassed that.
Yeah, I'm at 125 right now, and trying to think of. Yeah, yesterday was about 3 hours. Yeah.
Have you noticed any differences? I mean, obviously you've been busy with the new schedule and with the student teaching and such, but and also what have you done to make any changes?
The biggest thing is going to be the student teaching, obviously. I'm no longer sitting at my desk in front of my computer or just playing on my phone throughout the day. More so I'm, teaching. Or at least I can't just sit in the classroom on my phone throughout the day. So that plays a big part. But other than that, I mean, it's still, like I said, it's still not where I want it to be. I would like to really lower it. I still have not gotten rid of Reddit completely from my phone. So that obviously plays a factor because at night, if I'm just passively watching a show or something, I'll start scrolling just absentmindedly through whatever I can find on my phone to scroll through, or to play the game that I had mentioned that I play with my cousin. So there's that stuff, but for the most part, I mean, I think for cutting it pretty much in half from in a month's time is pretty decent.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. You're making progress.
So, yeah, but I mean, it's also given me more time for doing other things like reading, which I've been trying to implement, at least like read a chapter a night. I'm currently reading a book by John Green, which is The Anthropocene Reviewed, which it's a collection of essays that he's written on various topics. So like last night I read about pretty much the human time span, lifespan rather.
Mm-hmm.
So he talked about how if you take the whole lifespan of the Earth and you chunk it into a year, and this isn't like a novel idea, this has been talked about for decades now, but nonetheless, if you chunk it into a year, the first signs of life on Earth really don't come until like the end of February. And then if you bring it all the way out to December 31st at 11:59, humanity has really only been around since like 11:48 on December 31st.
Yeah.
And just to like to read that and to sit back and think on that, and the fact that on the grand scheme of things, like, we don't mean anything. And I keep going back to that idea again and again and again because it's just such a reassuring thought that it's like, it doesn't sound like it's something that should be reassuring, you know, but it's one of those deals of like, if you realize the fact that a couple million years ago, the oceans were 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're concerned that they're rising a couple degrees right now and sea levels rising, which I get it. Yes, that's a big deal. That's terrible for us in the long term and our survival in the long term. But for the Earth, it doesn't mean anything. Like,
yeah, I think I mean it I will say it is impressive in a bad way how much damage we've done as a species in such an incredibly short period of time.
Oh, absolutely.
Though I will also say that, I mean, humans are rather resilient, but at the same time, the Earth is more resilient.
The reality is that we are so worried about like an apocalypse happening. Like, we talk about like the end of the world and all that kind of thing. But first of all, we are the apocalypse. We're the ones that are ultimately going to be getting rid of ourselves. Yeah. We're causing all of this damage to the Earth, and the Earth is just kind of like fighting back in a sense. But at the end of the day, too, though, it's not going to be the end of the world. The world is going to go on for billions of years more, unless we like blow it up or something. It's going to be the end of humanity, and that's it. And
unfortunately, all those wonderful creatures out there that are highly specialized for their existing, habitat and lifestyle and stuff, I think we'll unfortunately drag them, many of them down with us,
like we already have. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
but at some point, it's at some point the Earth is just probably going to shake us off its back and then start over. But yeah.
But I mean, we've been around for what, like 250,000 years. I think something like that was the number. Compare that to some of the other animals that we have on this planet with us now, and that's nothing. Like, that is absolutely nothing. And it's just so fascinating to listen and to learn.
And that's also one of the reasons why I love going to so many of the places that I visit, because once you start to learn a bit more about the geology of these places, it puts things in a scale that, first of all, is kind of impossible to comprehend, but it does give so much more of a sense of respect for the timeline and how little, how short of a time we've been here. And just seeing how everything works, like some of these canyons in Death Valley, they're cutting into these mountains, and the mountains are kind of uplifted at an angle. So as you're walking in the canyon, you're basically walking through time as you're kind of going through all these different layers that are extended up at like a 45-degree angle. And it's just absolutely fascinating to just go in those areas and just to get a different sense of appreciation for it. But then also you hear about the experiences of people that go into space. I think it was William Shatner when he went up on one of I forget the name of the Amazon Blue Origins, I think is what it was. When he went up in that, and then you look at Earth, and then you turn and you look at the other way, and he was saying, you look at Earth, you look at life, you look at, and then you look towards space, and it just is nothingness, and just, one way is life, the other direction is death. And to think that everything as we know as a species, and everyone who has ever existed has lived on this one little oasis out in space.
Yeah.
I can see how that would be a very moving experience to see it from that vantage point, and have an even greater appreciation for where we actually are, yet as a species, here we are, creating wars with other countries. And yeah, you just, the humanity part of it is not the greatest. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.